to continue Redco's aviation metaphor, apologies for the slightly delayed takeoff. For those of you I know in the audience who've flown with us before, welcome. For people who might be meeting us for the first time, also welcome. For anyone who isn't quite here yet, is expecting to start at 11 o'clock, welcome in absentia. It'll be great to see you when you do arrive. This is, interestingly, in many ways, the kind of culmination of this exhibition. We've been working on this project, this show, with this title and this theme for over 2 years now. And it is an opportunity for you all to see the works by Lucy Clout and Marianna Simnett, which have taken two phases and two forms, seeing all four of those pieces alongside each other for the first time here at CCA. And some of you may remember that as part of GI last spring, Lucy and Marianna were accompanied also by Anne Harning and Kate Cooper, who presented prototype early pieces as part of What Will They See of Me here at CCA last April and May. I want to take us back to the beginning, and I think probably the way the day is going to go is that the first part is to try and analyze, interrogate, and find connections in this title, What Will They See of Me, which was the theme of the exhibition. And then as the day progresses, to start talking much more about the work that was produced under the concept and rubric of this title. So it will have that kind of progression throughout the day. But to begin, I want to just remind myself, as much as everyone else, about what it was that we found or was suggested by this title, which I was intrigued by when it suggested itself to me, had multiple meanings and potential for exploring in different ways in relation to kind of, contemporary life and culture. And I just want to very quickly go back and restate some of these things. I'm probably going to do this at a fairly rapid clip, so rather than just speaking now, I'm going to read what I've written. So apologies if I'm just like motoring through this, but there is a timetable to stick to. So, the first of about three key themes that I thought was represented by this phrase, what will they see of me, is one around the notion of visibility, and visibility at a time when not just artists, young emerging artists, but everyone seems to be seeking a greater kind of signature visibility for themselves in some ways. So the first question, what will they see of me, is one of visibility, and I'll start reading now. A time when we place greater emphasis on competing for people's ever-shrinking attention by communicating using the popular platforms of online visual media and social networks, how can we be sure that our own increasing currency, proficiency, even literacy with these forms will gain us a better and more distinctive individual profile when so many of our peers and contemporaries are not only similarly engaged and equally adept in the business of getting themselves noticed, but also find themselves, like us, with less time than ever to actually notice stuff in the first place? People may make more and more of an effort building up a unique signature presence online and sharing their individual experiences and opinions with the world. But if more and more people are all doing it simultaneously, isn't it, amidst and despite all this plethora of self-expression and self-assertion, harder than ever to get noticed or stand out? When we came up with the title of What Will They See of Me, we thought it was the slightly plaintive quality of the uncertain inquiry it poses might have a certain resonance with the position, even the predicament of today's young emerging artist, seeking, like so many before them, to bring their singular talent to people's attention, but doing so now in an arena that's more crowded and competitive than ever. How do you get seen these days, and what do you need to do to stand out? Especially when your stock in trade, the moving image, is increasingly the medium of choice for a generation of young, aspiring artists, and also the everyday lingua franca of a global popular vernacular. As well as this question of visibility, striving for visibility, the phrase, what will they see of me, also seemed to carry overtones of exposure, disclosure, particularly inadvertent disclosure. We've all become aware in recent months and years how the time we spend online engaged in myriad digital interactions and transactions generates data about us that is well over and above the images, words, sounds, and other bits of personal information we've specifically chosen to share with others. This does not seem to be unduly concerning for everyone. For some, it's a matter of indifference, just a simple fact of life, the taken for granted shadow that, like our shadow in the real world, follows us around, without much cause for pause in the new and heightened illumination of the digital world. Or to switch metaphors a little, the barely detectable and usually unheeded background radiation that accompanies prolonged exposure to this energizing glare. For some, the involuntary leakage or incontinent spilling of personal details into the public or no longer traditionally private spheres is a considerable source of anxiety. And the revelation that there is indeed a they out there listening to us, listening in, looking over all they're able to see of us, which appears is actually quite a lot, is a confirmation of long-held suspicions and fears, and an outrage that must be corrected. Which brings me to a second variant of the question, what will they see of me? One that sounds an additional note of caution, anxiety, even paranoia in the question it begs. Every time I think about this, though, I'm partly consoled by the thought that there would need to be an extremely omniscient intelligence, an omnipotent agency, and I use those words intelligence and agency advisedly, that could see and find and detect some pattern or some sense in all the random stuff we are pumping out. As I implied earlier, who's got the time to go all through this, let alone systematically? Is this anxious, paranoid inkling that at the end of the panoptical data telescope, there has to be someone out there, an all-seeing figure who knows, who can see deep into our every impulse and read our every move? A much older cultural reflex that posits or presumes a big brother, or beyond that, a godlike father figure. If the NSA didn't exist, and I'm not saying that they don't, we might have had to invent them. Because arguably, the one thing that's worse than someone reading all your emails is that actually no one is reading your emails, because frankly, no one cares, that they have no interest and no consequence, and that what we imagine being out there is not an unblinking, all-seeing eye, but simply the void. Some commentators have started to speculate that the seemingly unending torrent of personal information we're releasing into the digital ether, while qualitatively revealing, and probably more revealing than we recognize, is at the same time quantitatively deflecting. Or to put it another way, that there's a kind of safety in numbers, whereby the specific individual voices we otherwise place such store in become submerged within a crowd, where the unique signals we are otherwise busily seeking to amplify are drowned out amongst a self-generated cacophony of noise. Shared online platforms and social networks encourage us to display more and more of ourselves, put our best face forward, prefix the small letter I in front of all of our personal devices, and through using them increasingly regularly, accentuate what it is about us that makes us an individual. Our lives online and via and through these new digital networks promote the idea that we're each and every one of us our own unique snowflake. But who's got the presence of mind to stop and check in the middle of this snowstorm of information? There is one way, however, that technology we use to convey and express ourselves digitally online might have our number, and that is in the area of big data, an algorithmic intelligence that can in its own way detect and analyse complex aggregated snowflake patterns at both a micro and a micro level. Which brings me to the third potential meaning of the phrase, what will they see of me? Which is less to do with the footprint we're making or the thumbprint we are leaving right now, but more in the traces of ourselves we might be leaving behind for the future. Artists have always been disposed towards posterity. After all, if you're struggling to be noticed in the presence, there's always the consolation that you'll be vindicated in the future, a prospect that the logic of the avant-garde and of modernity in general continues to hold out. But there's always the chance that in placing your faith in and investing your hope in the future, the future might not turn out to be the place that you imagined it to be. In our a short preview blurb about today's event at CCA, we invoked a saying, almost a modern mantra: nothing dies on the internet. Like many of the things I've touched upon in these introductory remarks, the phrase has a different and competing resonance and interpretation. On the one hand, it might also almost be an article of faith, the internet as an enduring repository of human knowledge, where the best things about us are preserved and memorialized for posterity. At the same time, it might equally be read as almost a warning about how digital data doesn't distinguish between how we might and might not want to be seen in the long run. How throwaway remarks, casual indiscretions, mistaken or inadvertent actions can hang around to haunt us in ways we might not suspect. Nothing dies on the internet, to which we might counter with a correspondingly age-old and equally undying lament that life is fleeting and transient and that nothing lasts for as long as we might wish or expect. Knowing how quickly we outgrow or dispose of items of a technology, or how suddenly these technologies can themselves fizzle out and expire, making a claim that the marks and the traces, good or bad, involuntary or intentional, we are leaving behind today will outlive us or survive us indefinitely, also seems like a significant hostage to fortune in another way. These thoughts about the ideas, preoccupations, and ramifications about this phrase, what will they see of me, were, as I said, drafted about 2 years ago. And since then, obviously, there's a number of artists' works, which we'll come to later, which have been made under that title and within that broad rubric. And also some writing generated around the project in both years. In the first year for this publication, Alice Butler wrote an extraordinary text which paralleled the work of the 4 female artists in the first iteration of the show. And she's followed that up as Jerwood writer-in-residence at the moment with a series of blog posts and conversations between Marianna and Lucy and the works themselves, which we'll hear more of this afternoon. As part of the second year of the show, I asked Josh Cohen to write the essay for this second publication, and an equally wide-ranging and incisive text, which I'd encourage you to read. Josh is going to develop that a little bit further when he speaks after me. Josh is Professor of Comparative Literature at Goldsmiths in London, a practicing psychoanalyst and the author of a book, The Private Life, Why We Remain in the Dark, that I read avidly around the time that this project was coming together. Among the book's many insights is a reflection that in this time of increasing self-assertion, self-absorption, and self-regard, there is a parallel tendency or imperative to share things out in the open and subject all kinds of deep or trivial experiences to the light of perpetual examination. It's a state of affairs that's blurred and transformed the distinctions between public and private, and maybe in the process threatens to blind us to other invisible, unconscious forces which shape us and drive us, and where we may in fact be at our most individual and creative, but which are often hidden or unfathomable, not least to us ourselves. Josh's presentation, which as I said is a development from the catalogue essay he wrote, will then be followed by the writer and critic Esther Peeren, whose interest in the figure of the ghost and the spectre in contemporary culture should provide a good counterpoint to Josh's ideas around the haunted self. Remco will introduce Esther more fully after Josh speaks. Before then, though, just some final remarks. What will they see of me, as I said, suggested itself as an idea in early 2013, with either prescience, perspicacity, or some kind of tip-off that I'm not allowed to tell you about. It broke as well. The idea was out in the world just about a month before the NSA Edward Snowden story broke. Of course, although the WikiLeaks story had made the headlines just before then. It's also a year in which we started seeing more and more of these things. Namely, selfies. Although the word itself hadn't become something that was on everyone's lips. This shot from the Oscars in 2013, if you like, the selfie of all selfies, retweeted by so many people after it was posted that it sent social media almost into meltdown, probably sealed the deal. Selfie was almost inevitably the Oxford English Dictionary new word of the year for 2013. The Oxford English Dictionary new word of the year for 2014 is vape, a very different craze in some ways, but one where the individual is equally puffed up. What has intrigued me recently about the e-cigarette vaping phenomenon is a subsidiary craze called cloud chasing. Cloud chasing isn't, as its name implies, a frantic dash around the city to try and find little pockets of free Wi-Fi, but an attempt by rival vapers to post an image of themselves online in which their recognizable features are almost entirely obscured by a cloud of vape. I like to think of these images as almost anti-selfies, or the selfie and these vape images being two sides of the same contemporary face. They are almost also, in their own ways, I think, a kind of vanitas or a memento mori, in which the self, so sharply accentuated and defined in one form, is shown to be fragile, fleeting, nebulous, uncertain. So, these are images, or if you like, after images, that I'd like to leave hanging around as Josh talks about the haunted self and Esther speaks of phantoms and ghosts.